This is a tier list video of all the weapons and guns in Black Powder as of version 0.13. I will be making multiple tier lists that are based on the class they are used by instead of condensing all weapons into a single list. Cramping everything into one tier list would lose the nuance of which weapon belongs to which class. In the case of the Navy pistol and the brass pistol, even though the former has greater utility in the context of being a gun, you have to remember that the Navy pistol belongs to the Seaman class and not the officer class. The officer has the ability to use charge, which is one of the greatest crowd controlling abilities in the game. The Seaman can't. In the case of the double barrel pistol and the horse artillery pistol, even though the double barrel pistol reloads much faster with little foot speed penalty, it belongs to the officer class and not the infantry class, who has the ability to use the heavy saber, arguably one of the best melee weapons in the game. I will only be talking about 4 classes within the game, those being the infantry, officer, seaman, and sapper class. I will not be including the other 3 classes due to the lack of gameplay variety they have in their toolkit. Each and every weapon will be sorted into 5 different categories: their performance in objective maps with both normal and hardcore mode, their performance in endless maps with both normal and hardcore mode, as well as each weapon's effectiveness when trading or kiting zombies in endless. When I'm talking about the endless game mode, I'll be assuming that you're mainly playing to survive 35 rounds consecutively in order to get the old guard regiment. When I'm talking about training zombies, I'll be assuming that you're still playing in the endless game mode, but you're mainly trying to get the Alone at the End of the World achievement or trying to get old guard solo. I will not be covering weapons effectiveness in Siege, PvP, 200 Years Later, or Sleepy Hollow, as those game modes are not a part of the game's core identity. Again, all these lists were created as of version 0.13. Further updates will change the meta over time, and I will try to keep these tier lists updated. This video isn't meant to put down anyone who uses the lower tier weapons. Play however you feel like. I will occasionally go off on tangents throughout the duration of this video. You're able to skip them using the time markers in the description. If you would rather read a transcript of this video, I will leave it in the description as well. If you would like to discuss the usefulness or the lack of ability for a certain weapon, feel free to discuss with me in the comment section below or in my Discord server linked in the description. Starting off with the musket. The bayonet affixed to this gun makes it one of the best horde clearing tools in the game. Even though it can only hit one zombie at a time, it has amazing reach, great attack speed, and high damage to top it all off. In a lot of holdout sections and objective maps, you can practically fend off the zombies yourself, allowing the rest of your team to do other things. Even when you're by yourself, training the zombies and picking them off one by one is a breeze with the musket's bayonet. A lot of newer players tend to shy away from using the bayonet because you have to go into first person a lot for maximum effectiveness, but once you learn where zombies can spawn, how to move around maps, and how the hitbox of the bayonet works in general, the musket is basically a go-to choice for players of all skill levels. Its effectiveness during charges varies depending on how many zombies are clustered together, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem if you try to kill zombies one at a time. The musket's 10-second reload time is fairly average compared to a lot of the more powerful guns in the game, as the reload checkpoint for it is activated fairly quickly. You'll get pretty decent usage out of this gun. In endless mode, the bayonet no longer insta-kills by round 33 and onwards, but even beforehand, the bayonet will shred through zombies. In hardcore mode, the bayonet will start to falter as the health scaling increases so sharply that at some point you'll have to 2-tap a lot of zombies. This becomes a lot more apparent in maps like Catacombe de Paris and San Sebastian in sector holdout sections. And even in hardcore endless, the bayonet no longer insta-kills early on when round 12 begins. You still have the musket to kill bombers and igniters, but with the amount that spawn in hardcore, you might as well just use a faster reloading gun. The Carbine is a really good all-purpose gun. The shove basically gives you a fast way of playing objective maps and a failsafe when training zombies in endless. Even though the shove doesn't have the killing potential of the bayonet, you still have the option of using the heavy saber as your melee weapon to make up for it. The fast reload speed on the Carbine makes it pretty good for dealing with a steady stream of bombers and igniters, and in hardcore, you can start to see this gun pull through as its accuracy is pretty good even when shooting at pretty lengthy distances. Though again, you lose out on the bayonet. Even though the shove can deal damage, the zombie has to be stunned in order to receive damage, meaning that you cannot shove zombies as they're already stunned to continuously deal damage to them. The horse artillery pistol is a gun with a very basic concept. You have a second bullet to fire. It has no extra properties like bayonet or a shove. In normal mode, bombers and igniters don't spawn that often, so you won't be able to use this gun that much. While you can use it to kill zappers and lines of shamblers, the gun still has a fairly lengthy reload time compared to both the musket and the carbine when reloading the 2 barrels. Since one of the barrels is inaccurate, you'll have to wait for a target to move closer to you in order to kill them, rather than killing them from afar and then giving yourself more time to reload. In Hardcore though, you will be able to use this gun a lot more due to the fact that some maps spawn bombers and igniters in groups rather than steady streams. I personally believe the Carbine is a lot more effective though because the shove on that gun gives you a lot more defensive capabilities, but nonetheless, the Horse Artillery Pistol isn't a bad gun. The rifle is arguably the most lackluster gun in the game. Its damage, accuracy, and penetration are all unnecessary with an extremely lengthy reload to boot. The rifle's ability to see legitimate usefulness is dependent on the ability of your teammates to give you time to reload. It's a lot more difficult to be self-reliant since you have to spend time away from the front line in order to reload the rifle. The Horse Artillery Pistol sees a lot more usage than the rifle because that gun has a second shot, the rifle doesn't. One of the core problems of the gun is that it's meant to promote a more backline style of playing. The thing is, the infantry is one of the strongest classes in the game, with great tools for any situation. You're able to handle a multitude of scenarios due to how versatile the infantry's weapons are. The rifle takes away that versatility and forces you to play very slowly. I believe that the gun promotes a very lazy and unhelpful playstyle. Some people have suggested that to make the rifle good, the reload should be shortened in one way or another. I believe the problem with the rifle isn't with the reload, but rather its identity. The rifle is supposed to fire an extremely high damaging bullet that can shred through zombies, but again, the musket does the job just fine. Here's how I would buff the gun. For those who played Payday 2, you may be familiar with the Gray skill. If you use a sniper rifle and hit an enemy in the head, other enemies nearby your target will take a portion of that damage. I'm not saying this mechanic should be directly imported to the rifle, because that would make the gun significantly better than the Nock Gun. What I suggest is that headshotting zombies with a rifle would stun nearby zombies within a 4 to 5 stun radius for about 1.5 seconds, and also push them back slightly, similar to how the Spade works. The stun wouldn't affect bombers, zappers, or igniters. This would turn the rifle into a support tool and possibly a game-saving gun in the right hands. It would give officers and buglers extra time to build charge, or even allow yourself and teammates to escape and reposition. If the stun isn't long enough, you can make it 3 seconds. The 3 goals I have with this suggestion was to justify the lengthy reload of the rifle, incentivizing players to go into first person to hit headshots, and giving a reason as to why the increased penetration and range of the gun should exist. Again, this is just a suggestion. As of now, the rifle is just a gun that sits at the bottom of the barrel. The Pike replaces your gun in favor of a long-reaching melee weapon. With its new mechanic of increasing penetration for every zombie you kill, you can become a deadly force to be reckoned with when holding out certain areas. But since you are losing out on a gun, you're not that useful when having to deal with bombers and igniters unless you manage to hit them through a wall or if you trust your teammates enough to not shoot them as you're baiting them. Not a lot of maps allow you to do this safely. Nonetheless, the Pike is a pretty good weapon if you take time to learn how to use it. Talking about the melee weapons for the infantry, I said in the Sabre and hand axe tutorial video that once you understand the hand axe's hitbox, it becomes better to use than the Sabre. If the game was still in version 0.10 or 0.11, I would continue to stand by that claim. But with the introduction of 0.12, Guts and Black Powder had a new mechanic called the Ghoul system. It was a mechanic implemented to prevent cheaters from controlling zombies directly. Explaining the Ghoul system will take a bit to explain. If you watch the devlog titled War, Fazezin said that the bots are just a gray box in the server's eyes, meanwhile the client, which is you, turns those gray boxes into human-like enemies. The same logic applies to the zombies. In the last few versions of Guts and Black Powder, you would have to aim slightly ahead of a zombie's actual position in order to hit the zombie that the server sees. In older iterations, as well as the release of version 0.12, you're allowed to hit where you see the zombie. This does not change how zombies move around. The Ghoul system only activates when a zombie is about to perform an action, whether that be scratching, grabbing, pinning, or swinging, and checks to see if the zombie is actually supposed to be there. For simplicity's sake, I will talk about when a shambler is about to attack you. Take into account as to how much ping you have when you play on a server. The number is how many milliseconds for the server to send you information, as well as how many milliseconds for you to send information back. If you have 100 milliseconds of ping, it takes roughly 50 milliseconds for the server to send you info, and another 50 milliseconds for you to send the info back. The server and your client will attempt to autocorrect the zombie's position if anything seems off. It's not always an even divide, but for simplicity's sake, just imagine it this way. This is already 1/10 of a second for the server and your client to agree on what happens to you. In most circumstances, hitting a shambler before they scratch or grab you prevents them from doing so in the first place. But if you manage to hit them during this duration, there is a high possibility that you will damage them, but they'll attack you successfully nonetheless because the info transfer between you and the server wasn't fast enough. This logic starts to become a lot more janky with higher latencies, and is also why zombies were able to teleport when the Ghoul system first released. It's also why they were able to attack outside of their apparent range. Melee attacks would even miss occasionally, even though it appeared the weapon made contact with the body. After a handful of patches, the Ghoul system became a little bit more bearable, but even then it still has inconsistent results. Going back to the actual tier list with this mechanic in mind, it's better to stick with the Sabre in normal mode to keep zombies at range before they get too close for you. Even when training, I would still recommend using the Sabre. In hardcore mode, the hand axe can get pretty decent mileage because of how high zombie health can scale. If you're willing to play around the Ghoul system, the hand axe can probably give you better results than the Sabre, but then again, it's not as safe to use. Before version 0.11 released, the usual argument between using the Sabre or the hand axe was that the Sabre was just more consistent to use, compared to the hand axe's stubby range and smaller hitbox, but the hand axe had higher damage and attack speed if you decided to understand how to use it. After version 0.11, the Heavy Sabre was introduced to the Infantry class, which pretty much erased the entire discussion with having a longer reach than the Sabre and almost similar damage output to the hand axe. In fact, this made using the other guns such as the Carbine, Rifle, and Horse Artillery Pistol safer to use since you didn't need to rely on the Musket's bayonet to wipe out groups of zombies effectively. It even comes with the impale mechanic the bayonet and the Pike have during charges, albeit without the damage increase. This weapon is probably the only weapon in the game where you can ignore its downside, which is the subpar damage with the side slashes. Let's say that you're playing with the Pike. You lack a gun, your foot speed is slowed while you have it equipped. Or, if you're using the Pickaxe on a Sapper, you have a smaller reach with a more stricter hitbox. With the Heavy Sabre, you straight up do not have to use the side slashes, just learn how to use the thrusts and flail with the Heavy Sabre. S tier in all departments. All of the officer's weapons are really good, and very rarely will they ever fail you unless you're standing egregiously far from your target. Between the single and double barrel pistol, I somewhat agree that the double barrel pistol is a direct upgrade from the single barrel because the second shot allows you to use it in more situations like killing zappers or lines of shamblers and runners. In normal mode though. The two obvious downsides to the double barrel is that the bullets have a higher chance to miss, and you spend a handful of more seconds reloading compared to the single barrel pistol. When playing on hardcore mode, or when you're training zombies, I believe the single barrel pistol wins over the double barrel pistol simply because the faster reload on the single barrel gives you a lot more uptime for using your Sabre. Its longer effective range makes it more reliable when taking out bombers and igniters from far away without having to waste at most half a minute for them to walk within your range. As for the brass pistol, it was a hilariously bad gun when it first released. It only fired 5 pellets instead of 7 and had abysmal accuracy. After a couple of fixes, a lot of more professional players started to see its strengths as being a good way to build charge efficiently. It still has poor penetration, and occasionally pellets will miss your intended target at ranges even the double barrel pistol would hit, but nonetheless, it's still a nice gun to use. The Seaman is a really good class for clearing out hordes instantaneously. The Blunderbuss has good game-saving potential with an average reload speed too. In objective maps on normal mode, you probably won't get high reward shots often since there aren't as many zombies to begin with unless your team manages to quarter themselves. In hardcore and endless maps though, the Blunderbuss starts to really prove its worth. More zombies mean more opportunities to wipe out bigger groups, and in endless maps, most of them provide good choke points for zombies to funnel through. I really don't recommend using the Blunderbuss to train zombies around unless there's only a small group left, because you don't have any capabilities like using a bayonet or shoving. You'll have to switch to your melee weapon if you get caught by surprise. Nonetheless, the Blunderbuss is simply a very good gun. The Navy pistol allows the Seaman to be more aggressive and basically turn him into the infantry class with a shotgun. It has a fast reload, it can shove zombies, and even provides knockback when doing supply runs. I recommend using this gun more when playing on normal mode or when training zombies, as the foot speed penalty when reloading isn't as harsh, and you'll get to target bombers and igniters more often instead of prioritizing groups of shamblers and zappers that you could have meleeed instead. It's still decent in hardcore objective maps and endless maps, but with how much zombies stick together in those situations, the lack of penetration of the Navy pistol will sometimes cause you to not hit your target even if they're a couple of studs away, simply because there are a few other zombies in front of you. Even then, it's also a very good gun. The Nock Gun suffers the same downsides as the infantry's rifle. It has immense firepower but very little reward. It does have increased damage and penetration if you load more than one bullet, making so that you don't have to headshot zappers in order to kill them. While the Seaman class was first made to be a backline class focusing on wiping out groups of zombies, the Nock Gun rarely sees a lot of use for that and is mainly just a zapper killer. Shamblers and runners rarely line up in a straight line anyways, which is what made the Blunderbuss so strong. You can barely use it to snipe bombers and igniters because the inaccuracy of the pellets is still very much noticeable if you don't load enough of them. At that point, you might as well switch over to the Infantry class or the Officer class if all you want to do with a Nock Gun is shoot bombers and igniters. I really don't have a good idea as to how the Nock Gun could be buffed. If I had to, I would just recycle the idea I had for the rifle, but instead of stunning zombies on headshots, the Nock Gun would instead stun zombies for a whole 3 seconds that were 5 studs in front of you when you fired. The effect happens within a 90-degree cone in front of you and also pushes them back. It's not really an interesting idea, but it's something. The Nock Gun rarely makes itself useful compared to the other shotguns the Seaman has, but at least it's better than the Infantry's rifle. For the melee weapons available for the Seaman class, I still stand by the belief that the Sabre is better than the hand axe due to the existence of the Ghoul system. But again, you can still see good use out of the hand axe if you decide to use it in hardcore mode and learn how to combat the Ghoul system. The boarding axe turns you into a Zapper specialist. You can walk up to them and kill them instantly as if you were playing the Sapper class. The spike's high damage makes it useful for having to pick off zappers, but that's pretty much the only strength of the weapon. The main downside is that it has the same stubby range and small hitbox of the hand axe while maintaining the same swing speed as the Sabre. The extra 5 damage on the cutting blade rarely comes into play, so you'll get similar results if you use the Sabre instead. The spike version can only hit one zombie at a time too, meaning that you have to clear out other zombies nearby zappers just to get to the zapper in the first place, unless you want to play very risky. At that point, you should just use your gun to kill the zapper. In hardcore mode, zappers have much higher health than usual, meaning that you have to 2-tap zappers in order to kill them, which wastes time. It's an alright weapon, but just use it for normal mode. The Sapper is also a really solid class with a really solid starter weapon, the axe. It deals high damage, it can stun zombies, and pretty much works in any situation. The only real downside is that the axe has a very slow swing speed, but even then, you have a hammer to make buildings that you should be playing around. I don't really have anything more to say regarding the axe. As for the pickaxe, you really shouldn't be using it too much in normal mode since the damage isn't really necessary. The faster swing speed is nice to deal with runners, but not ideal when trying to wipe out hordes of shamblers. While it is theoretically possible to clear out more zombies with this than the axe, you have to put in a lot more work as to where you position your buildings, how you condense zombies into certain areas, and how your fellow allies play around your buildings than just playing normally using the axe. It does have a place in hardcore mode for dealing with zombies one at a time, especially zappers, but even then, when having to fight a cluster of zombies all at once, you kinda have to pick them off one at a time compared to the axe's consistent high damage. Use the pickaxe if you want to, but personally I believe it requires way too much in order to get the same results as the axe. The Spade is intended to be a defensive tool and makes you a lot more reliant on your barricades. In normal mode, you can get pretty good usage out of it, since the damage reduction of barricades against all zombies makes it useful when playing with new players who only know how to camp certain positions. But once your barricades begin to get broken down, and you don't have enough time to get a stake or a new barricade built, you're basically left with a shovel that does nothing else. In hardcore mode, zombies deal more damage to your buildings, and they spawn more often as well, making it difficult to use the Spade if you're the only sapper. In a lot of objective maps, there's a good amount of areas where you're unable to entrench barricades in the first place since those areas have wooden floors. While you are able to shove shamblers and zappers attacking your barricades, the Spade stun doesn't happen as often or last as long as the shove on the axe or the pickaxe. In endless mode, entrenching your barricades can be alright if you're only going for the Old Guard Regiment achievement, but when you're doing extremely high rounds like 50 and onwards, the poor damage of the Spade isn't enough to deal with the onslaught of zombies, even if you try to keep your barricades up as long as possible. It's still a decent weapon, but not that good of a self-defense weapon when you're by yourself. The reason why I'm including the Siege Engineer armor in this tier list is because I think it heavily impacts your gameplay enough to warrant a spot in the list. I think of the armor as more of a beginner tool to give newer players an easier time to play the Sapper class. You're able to melee bombers without dying, and you can survive more hits from shamblers and zappers. It essentially gives you more effective health. The downsides is what makes the armor unappealing the better you become at the game. While you do move slightly slower and take slightly more fire damage, the real negative attribute of the armor is the decreased building efficiency when you're using your hammer. In normal mode, this isn't much of a problem, but once you play on hardcore mode or on an endless map, it becomes a real problem. You're unable to keep your buildings up for longer, which may cause your team to lose ground. While you can still use the shove of the axe and pickaxe to prevent zombies from hitting, the shove still has a limit of 6 zombies maximum. In hardcore mode and in endless maps, there will usually be groups of shamblers and zappers around that number or even higher. Plus, with the armor, you lose out on using the water bucket, which can save teammates' lives when burning alive, and preserve your position in the map in case an igniter throws their lantern at you. You also lose out on possibly using grenades, which allows you to clear corners or groups of zombies since you lack a gun. Even though the main selling point of the armor is to make you tank more hits, you should be trying not to get hit in the first place. When you get grabbed by shamblers, pinned by runners, or incapacitated by igniters, the time it takes to die is pretty much the same as if you didn't have the armor. It doesn't give you good protection against those kinds of attacks. Again, it's a good tool to give newer players a safety net for learning how to play the class, but once you get good enough at the game, you start to see how much of a hindrance the armor can be. And with that, that's all the weapons I wanted to cover. You can pause the video in order to give yourself more time to look at the tier list for each class and each scenario. I wanted to keep this video as objective as possible, but do let me know your opinions in the comments below. Since the game isn't finished yet, more weapons will be added over time, and current weapons may be changed entirely in the future. For now, this is how I rank the weapons of Guns and Black Powder. I'd also like to let you know that I have a Discord server linked in the description of this video. In fact, I do that for every video of mine. Feel free to talk to me about anything in there. If you decide to hang around the Discord server, you'll be able to join events such as my GNB But Hell series, game record attempts, and other unique events that you won't find anywhere else. Most importantly, thank you for watching till the very end. See you next time.